The real answer to what if the symbiote bonded with these 5 characters is the same answer that you can apply to many, many other issues and episodes of What If, and that answer is nobody would care, that's what. Howdy, I'm Kurt Williams, and today we're looking at issue 2 of What If Venom by Jeremy Holt and Tadam Gyadu. I gave the first issue of the series a pretty bad review, and paging through it a couple weeks ago, I thought the art looked better than the last issue, but still not amazing. And as I said before, I'm a fan of Jeremy Holt, but I don't think this is really his best work. And reading through this issue, I am only more convinced that that is the case. Like I've said before, What If issues have a problem with pacing. They just have to cram so much stuff into every single issue that things are just kind of choppy, it's fast, you don't have a lot of time to sit with moments, and that's just kind of how What If comics are. But I think this issue has a fundamental misunderstanding of characters, and the plot itself is just kind of uninteresting. Nothing really happens. We start with this fight between Wolverine and Sabretooth, and it's probably one of the most boring fights between the two characters I've ever read, and I have read a lot of fights between Wolverine and Sabretooth. It's no secret that Wolverine is one of my favorite characters, but I don't want to be that comic nerd who loves the character and has read every single issue involving the character and knows all of the lore and all of the background, and then you get a writer who doesn't really know the character all that well, but they took a job because they're a writer and they need to make money, and they wrote something they're semi-proud of, but maybe makes a couple mistakes with the background on the character, and then I come in and I'm complaining about how they got all these things wrong and it's not the real character and I'm just so mad. I don't want to be like that. It's an issue of What If, and it really doesn't matter. But the way that Wolverine is talking to Sabretooth does not really reflect how Sabretooth has brutally murdered every single girlfriend Logan has ever had. They keep calling each other pal and old friend. It just feels out of place. And yeah, they're trying to kill each other, sort of. I mean, you can't really tell that they're trying to kill each other. It's like the most lackluster fight I've ever seen between the two of them. You just can't feel any of the history between them. It goes beyond having not really read all of Weapon X, or having not really read all of Wolverine Volume 2. It feels more like just not knowing the characters very well. And then we get these scenes where the symbiote has bonded with Wolverine, and the symbiote is in control, and Wolverine is being repressed, and the symbiote just kind of causes general mayhem. He doesn't really have a plan, no goals, he's just going around eating stuff and being a menace. Meanwhile, Wolverine is trapped in a memory of his time at Weapon X, and the facility looks nothing like the actual Weapon X facility, by the way. And it's not really clear if he's being trapped in that specific place by Venom in particular, or if it's like Wolverine's trauma trapping him there. There is a lot of talk about trauma in this issue, that word in particular, which is a concept worth talking about in comic books, and if you're going to choose a Marvel character to discuss that, then Wolverine is a pretty good choice. But the way that it's discussed and how often it's discussed doesn't seem like an in-depth analysis of Wolverine's character. It kind of feels more like a Jeremy Holt self-insert. It's a Jeremy Holt story about processing trauma and overcoming trauma with Wolverine's face stamped on the top. And self-inserts in comics have been a hot topic since that video from Comic Palace where Glenn, I think, was talking about how much he hated it and how it has no place in comic books. And I think that plenty of older fans feel that way as well. Self-inserts are generally not well respected in comics right now. I would argue that James Tynion does a good job of writing self-inserts, but that's usually in independent projects where it's kind of just about him and there's no already existing character for him to insert himself on top of, so it makes more sense that way. Bringing it around to the point, in this issue, all the talk about trauma just doesn't feel like a Wolverine story. It feels like a self-insert, and it's kind of cheap. So when Wolverine is finally able to overcome his trauma, I guess, and break out of the Weapon X facility in his mind, he just kind of automatically regains control over the symbiote, and now he's forcing it to turn into his street clothes, and it's like, oh yeah, you have my full attention, you're the boss now, oh. That's some frickin' narrative whiplash right there. And then Wolverine also gets picked up by Moon Knight, who is now Stephen Grant in this issue, just like She-Hulk was picked up by his cabbie personality in the first issue. So overall, we have a very lame Wolverine-Sabretooth fight that doesn't really respect the history of the characters, Venom doing what the frick ever while we're really more concerned with what's going on in Wolverine's brain, and then Wolverine magically winning the fight by putting absolutely no effort in. I just don't understand how this idea of a comic looked good on paper. It's entirely premise with no follow-through. It's not enough to say, look, we've got Venom mixed with Wolverine, isn't that neat? Because yeah, it's a neat idea, but what's the compelling narrative here? But maybe I'm being too picky about a What If comic. Plenty of good What If comics didn't really have a compelling narrative either, so I'll drop it. It's fine. As for the art, like I said before, it is better than the first issue, but it's still not that great, and in particular, I'm thinking of this fight scene between Wolverine and Sabretooth. This first panel, and then moving down the page, I think has just some stiff poses. There's not much energy here, Wolverine and Sabretooth fights are big and scary and energetic, and this just feels kind of stale. This panel in particular, especially when combined with that wimpy little word bubble, just looks pathetic. It's almost laughable how dumb Wolverine looks here. I feel just as threatened as Sabretooth did, which is not at all. When I think of other artists that I can compare this art to, the first one that comes to mind is probably Dan Jurgens. Just looking at the musculature and the shading choices and the silhouettes of the characters, it's got kind of a Jurgens feel to it. Every once in a while I get kind of a Greg Land vibe, especially on this page here, probably mostly because of the shape and the detail on his helmet, but also because of the choice of muscle and the coloring on his pecs in particular, and his right hand, the way that those fingers are drawn, that seems like a very Greg Land way of drawing those details. Maybe this panel here is drawing on a little bit of Jimenez's work. In general, the artist really isn't that committed to any particular style. It's just kind of better than average comic art. I've definitely seen far worse being published by Marvel, but I'm not super impressed by this art. So overall, I would rate issue 2 of What If Venom probably like a high 5 out of 10. I think the art, even though it's kind of underwhelming, is carrying most of the weight in this issue. It's not terrible to look at. But the writing is just so boring. I just don't care. I'm sorry, Jeremy. I know you can do better. I believe in you. In the next issue, the symbiote is going to bond with Doctor Strange, so if you're into that, go ahead and pick it up and let me know how it was, because I think I'm done with this series now. And if you read it, what did you think?